Hello and welcome, friends. You would recall that in our last session we were discussing the external causes of industrial sickness, those factors in the environment which cause industrial sickness, and because of some technical issue the discussion ended abruptly, so we are going to start from the same point. You would recall that we had discussed recessionary trends and credit squeeze by banks as external causes for industrial sickness, and we were in midst of discussion on delayed payments by customers. Therein we had understood that many a times these firms which are operating in the B2B, business to business space, they do not get paid promptly for their products which they supply to some other larger scale industry, because of which their working capital requirement increases. They at times have to go for the various financial institutions to obtain working capital loans. Naturally their interest outgo will be higher and their cost of operations would be higher, which may impact their viability. Then change in government policies can also bring about industrial sickness. Very recently government has announced that they would be banning the use of single-use plastic, those kind of plastic made items made up of plastic which can be used only once. For example, many times you might have seen in various parties, you might have come across the straw. When you are having a cold drink, you use a straw which is a single-use plastic, or maybe a plastic plate. So these are all single-use plastics and the government is planning to phase them out. Now have a look at the impact on those firms which were basically producing these kind of single-use plastics. So the government changed the policy, government announced it, and these companies didn't have sufficient notice so that they could switch to some other products, because of which some of these companies, their viability will get impacted. They would not be able to survive in the long term. So this is one issue which might cause industrial sickness, abrupt changes in the government policies. Then there are infrastructure bottlenecks also which cause industrial sickness. Many a times, for example, the industries do not have access to 24/7 power supply. Electricity supply is not reliable, because of which they will either have to rely on alternative sources like generators or diesel generators, or they would have to keep their machines and keep their workers idle. In both these situations, their cost of operations would increase, which will impact their viability. So other kind of infrastructure bottlenecks could be lack of good quality roads, lack of good transportation infrastructure, lack of banking facilities, or being unable to access communication facilities. So these are all infrastructural bottlenecks. Then lack of raw material could at times be a cause for industrial sickness, specifically if the raw materials of the bad quality is not of the good quality, it's not of the quality which is required by a particular firm. Naturally, bad quality raw material would ultimately result into a bad quality product and ultimately will cause the customers to switch to some other supplier. So this could be one problem. The other problem could be when the industries are working with the raw material which is only available in foreign countries, so they are importing these raw materials and government restricts the quantities of imports. The objective why government does this, the reason why government does this is to preserve its forex reserve. However, this kind of restriction will do what? It will increase the prices of the landed item in the country, because the supplies have been restricted to a particular level. So naturally the prices would rise and naturally the raw material would be costlier for the firms naturally, and it would increase the cost of operations because now you have to spend more to buy the same amount of raw material. Naturally the overall cost of production would also increase, and this can cause losses. This can lead to the firm incurring losses. So this is another issue, another external cause for industrial sickness. Now let us talk about some of the internal causes. These were the causes which were external to the firm. They were beyond the firm's control. They were part of the macroeconomic environment and therefore beyond the control of the firm, beyond the control of the management of the firm. So there is not much that a particular firm can do about these external causes. But as far as internal causes, they are inherent within the firm. They are inside the firm. These are the causes within the firm which are causing the industries or the firms to incur losses, which are leading to their incurring losses, which are causing them to incur losses. Now these are those causes which can be controlled by the management of the firm, and they have greater control over this, and they can somehow ensure that they don't impact the businesses. So these are the causes which a manager should be more focused on rather than the external causes. You should, as a manager, try to adapt to what is happening in the external environment, while the internal causes are the ones which you should actively tackle, right? Now let us talk about the internal causes. Inexperienced promoters. Many a time some of the promoters who have actually spent their money to set up a particular business or to set up a business enterprise, they do not have sufficient experience, because of which they make so many mistakes, and these mistakes ultimately cause the business to fail. Then we have got over enthusiastic owners. Now what do we mean by over enthusiastic owners? Over enthusiastic owners, they are too optimistic about the business prospects, about the future prospects. They are too optimistic, so they expend without worrying too much about the risks inherent in such expansion. So they would expand when the economy is looking good, when the macroeconomic situation is fine. They would expand too much. They wouldn't expand beyond what is required, and then what will happen? This over expansion will cost them a lot of money. Plus, when the market situation changes, then the capacity, the extra capacity that they have gone for, that may remain idle. So this could cause industrial sickness also. So being over enthusiastic is not going to work for the owners of the firms. In fact, in business it is said that you have to be a moderate risk taker. You cannot be a extremely high risk taker. You cannot take high risks, extremely high risks, where the chances of the risk turning out to be a good bet, they are very, very low. You should not go for these kind of high risk situations. On the other hand, over enthusiastic owners, they bet too much, and they are generally high risk takers. They take extremely high risks without giving it much of a thought, and that is why there are chances of such enterprises failing. Many a time some of the firms use improper financial mix. They rely on costly sources of finance. They are not able to have access to, or they simply are unaware of the cheaper sources of finance. So costly source of finance means they obtain loans from costlier source of finance, which means they are going to pay more the rate of interest is going to be higher for them, so their interest outgo is going to be higher. Naturally, it would impact their balance sheet, it would impact their profit and loss account. On the other hand, if a particular firm exerts efforts to find out the cheapest possible source of finance, then naturally they would be able to reduce their cost of operations, because their interest outgo would be much less. So naturally, if a company is relying on costlier source of finance, their interest outgo is going to be higher, because of which they are not going to be able to earn very huge profits, right? Then many a times some of the companies, they rely excessively on the own funds, on the funds of the owner or the other shareholders, or their retained earnings rather than borrowing from the banks. Now why is this bad? This does not look bad, but this is bad. This can also cause problem, because number one, what will happen? Less borrowing would mean the more you borrow, the more you can save tax because of the interest shield. I hope you have read about the interest shield and the depreciation shield. That is a topic in financial management. So the more you borrow, the higher would be your interest outgo, and the lower would be your earnings after tax. Because of that, you'll have to pay less tax. So this is the interest shield, and likewise is for the depreciation shield. So if they borrow too little an amount and rather rely only on excessive use of their own funds, naturally they would not be able to make use of this kind of interest shield or the dividend shield. So this is one problem with some of the enterprises. They go for excessive reliance on their own funds, their own retained earnings, or the funds which have been contributed by the shareholders, which is not very good. Then mismanagement and diversion of funds. Now this could be a major reason of industrial sickness. If you look at the recent cases of industrial sickness, even the large scale industries, you would find that news have come out in open now that so many diversions had taken place, so many instances of diverting the funds had taken place, had actually happened. So this is one major reason for industrial sickness. And mismanagement, again, there is no cost economization, there is no effort to reduce the cost of operation. So that is the meaning of cost economization. Trying to economize means trying to spend as low as possible, as less as possible. So however, there is no such focus on reducing one's cost of operations. Then many companies don't build reserves when they are having good years, which means when they are earning supernormal profits, they don't keep the excess profit that they have earned as retained earnings so that they can use it in future when the situation is not that good. So they are not able to build their reserves when the going is good, and because of which they tend to fail when the market situation is relatively poorer, when the market is in a bad shape and the demand is low. So this can also happen. Many a times the inventory levels are too high. You have been studying production and operation management, and you understand when the inventory levels are high, what will happen. High inventory levels, first thing, a lot of your money would be tied up in the inventories because you have bought so many inventories which are simply not required. So a lot of your money would be tied up in inventories. Secondly, you will have to worry about the safekeeping of this inventory, how to store this inventory so that it does not get damaged while in storage. So this is another cost for you. You may have to insure the inventory items that you have, so you may have to pay a higher insurance premium for these inventory items, and naturally a lot of space would be consumed in storing the inventory. Now this again is a problem of mismanagement, and you would be studying in production operation management that we have got a particular model and a particular formula to calculate the appropriate inventory levels, the economic order quantity model. So if too much of inventory stored beyond what is required by the firm, then again it is going to increase the expenditure for the firm, and naturally it would reduce the profit making potential of the firm. So this is another instance of mismanagement. If the management is well qualified, experienced, they would certainly not go for such high inventory levels. Then there is lack of market research. Naturally, many of the industrial firms, some of them, they lack the market research. There is no market research taking place. One reason could be lack of funds, because of which they simply don't think of investing in these kind of activities. The other reason could be the lack of awareness, lack of sensitization, that knowing about the market, knowing about the customers can be a very, very profitable for the firm. So say they simply do not want to spend on these kind of activities because they consider them a waste of time and other resources, and that is why what ultimately happens is that they are not able to understand what the customer requires, because simply they are not conducting much of a market research. They simply don't understand what the customer requires, and since they don't understand, they are simply not able to design a product which satisfies the customer needs. Again, the demand forecast can be very, very inaccurate, which means in some periods you will produce more than what is being demanded by the customers in the market. In other periods, what will happen is you have produced too little while there is a lot of demand in the market, and since your product is not available, the customer would simply switch to some other company. So inaccurate demand forecast can lead to these kind of issues. Then again, because of lack of market research, the investment in branding is also low. The investment in coming up with new product is also low, and this is going to cost the company a lot in the short term future. If you compare it with what the big companies do, if you talk about HUL even if the product is doing well, they would at some point of time get that particular brand removed from their portfolio. HUL has been selling so many different products, so many different brands. So even if a brand is doing really well in the market, after some point of time they will replace that brand by a new brand. And why do they do that? Because they know that the customer gets used to a particular brand, and if there is no improvement in the brand, then after some time at least, the customer would not be able to retain the same amount of interest in the brand, because the brand has not changed itself. The customer is looking for a more energetic, a fresher offering, while the brand has not been able to change itself. And that is why what the customer will do is customer will simply switch. So this happens when the brands don't refresh them, don't change according to times. And for this, what you need to develop new products. You need to have this process of new product development, keep coming up with new improved varieties, improved versions of the product. If the company does not spend on these items, then after a point of time their products become obsolete and the customers switch. Then underestimating the competition. Many of the firms, they underestimate the competition. They think that the competition is not going to give them a tough fight for the share of market. However, this is not true. Many a times the rival firms are really strong, and they may also have deep pockets, which mean that they can withstand all kind of competitive moves by a particular firm, by the competitor firms. So it's very important for the management of the SICK enterprises, management of the firms, to understand the strength of the competition. What is it good at? And by competition we mean the rival firms. So you should have a good understanding of the rival firms. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their competencies? What are they planning to do in future? However, since these kind of information gathering or data gathering is missing in some of the firms, they are doomed to fail. They are doomed to turn sick. Some more internal causes are there. Many a times improper technology is being used. Many a times the reason is lack of funds. In other cases, the reason, as I was also saying for the market research, the reason could be lack of sensitization towards the importance of new age technology. So they are simply not aware of how the new technology can bring them so many benefits. So what do? They simply remain stuck to the same old technology, and slowly their technology becomes obsolete, old, of no use, irrelevant. And naturally their obsolete technology is not going to win them any customers, because the product that they will produce would also not be of a very good quality, because it has been using the old technology. Again, many a times they neglect the machine maintenance also. Maintenance do not take place periodically, but only when there is some problem in the machinery, which means they don't go for preventive or predictive maintenance, they only go for corrective maintenance. Naturally, for the time when the machine is not working because of some technical issue, the workers have to remain idle, which is a waste of firm's resources. The other operations in the assembly line would also remain idle. So if the machines are not being provided periodic maintenance and they break down in the middle of the production, then it is going to be a big loss for the firms. Again, they don't use IT tools, information technology tools. Again, many times lack of funds. On other occasions, it is the lack of awareness of how IT tools can bring about improvement in the prospects of a particular firm. So they simply don't use IT tools. You can have a look at so many enterprises which are operating in your vicinity, and you would find that they simply don't use any information technology tools, and because of which they're not able to work very productively. Their operations are not as productive as are the operations of rival firms, and slowly they lose out in the market. Then underutilization of capacity, or the capacity is not at all being utilized. It is idle, IDLE, no work to do. That is what idle means. So the capacity is idle, there is simply no work, or the capacity is underutilized, which means the machines can run for, let's say, 22 hours a day. 2 hours are left for maintenance, so they can run for 22 hours a day, but they are being run only for 12 hours a day because there is not sufficient demand in the market. The customers have not demanded the product, so naturally there is no use running the machine for the whole time duration of 22 hours. So the capacity utilization would be much less. It can be called the underutilization of capacity, and the employees also would be underutilized. So while the work day is, let's say, 10 hours, they will have nothing to do once they've completed 6 hours, because by that time they would have finished their work. So this happens when the capacity is underutilized or the capacity is idle, and this could happen because of unreliable power supply. I talked about how many times the power supply is not reliable. The power supply is on and off, it is available on and off only. So whenever there is a power cut, naturally the machines will have to be stopped. So this will reduce the capacity utilization levels. The capacity would remain idle. Many a times it is because of the scarcity of raw materials. I have told you how raw materials, specifically if they are being imported from some other country, many times government imposes quantity restrictions on such raw materials, and so these raw materials are scarce, because of which the machines are not operating at full capacity. Naturally, you have less amount of raw material, you would have probably wanted the double of that raw material, but you have a very small amount. Naturally, your machines would only be running for half the time. So the scarcity of raw material can also lead to underutilization of machinery or underutilization of workforce. Then lack of skilled manpower is again a big issue with many of the firms, and this is specifically true for those firms which have less resources to invest in hiring skilled manpower. And the example that is mentioned here is of SSIs, small scale industries. They have problems. They find it very, very difficult to arrange credit for them, to arrange funds for them, and they simply are unable to hire skilled manpower, and because of which their operations are not run in a professional manner and they lose out in the marketplace. Then delayed recognition of impending crisis. Many a times it also happens that the management or the owners or the board of directors, they get to know that some crisis is brewing. It is about to cause problems to the firm. The crises are brewing and they may very soon bring the viability of the firm into doubt. However, there is delayed recognition of such crisis, such impending, likely, probable crisis. And even if these kind of crises are recognized, what the firms do, they would they would request their financial institute, the financing institute, to increase the credit limits. If, for example, they have incurred losses, so rather than analyzing what could be the reasons for losses, they straight away get their credit limits increased. So rather than actually finding the cause for the losses, they do what? They go for additional loan, they go for additional borrowing, which again becomes very, very counterproductive and leads to industrial sickness. Now let us talk about the impact of industrial sickness on the economy. Now we are not talking of the sickness impact on that particular firm, we are talking about the economy as a whole, and you can understand most of the small scale enterprises or most of the industries, they pay government lots of taxes. For example, if they are indulged in selling goods and services tax is one. They probably will be paying corporate income tax, corporate tax also, the corporate tax also. Plus there are so many taxes that these kind of firms pay, and in the case that these firms turn sick, the government loses out a lot of its revenue. So the government will have to lose out on the taxes that are being paid by these kind of enterprises. Again, if the industry has turned sick, some resources which are otherwise scarcely available, they remain tied up with these sick units. So the sick units, they are incurring continued losses, but they are not stopping their operations. So this is what happens with sick units, because they feel that maybe another 2 years, 3 years down the line, they would again turn to black, they would again become profitable. However, while trying to do this, they tie up the very, very scarce resources which are generally not available easily, and they don't let these resources go to the other firms which might be needing these resources and which might be operating in a more efficient manner. So these sick units, they also keep the resources tied up without actually using those resources. Then it can also lead to increase in non-performing assets. Non-performing asset, what do we mean by this? When bank gives a particular loan to, let's say, a particular enterprise, and the enterprise is not able to return that loan, the bank terms such loans as non-performing assets. Non-performing assets means those loans which are not fetching the bank any return in the form of either principal or interest. So this could be another issue with the industrial sickness. But whenever industrial sickness happens at a large scale, it also leads to an increase in bank NPAs, non-performing assets. Again, there could be job losses in the enterprise which is not viable anymore, or which has started incurring losses, which again is a big problem specifically for India, because in India we require many jobs every year. So we are looking for those kind of industries which can generate jobs. On the other hand, sick industries will terminate their employees, so there would be a loss of jobs in these kind of industries. Again, loss of production is another issue. Industrial units which are sick, they do not produce at their full capacity, so naturally the production which they could have done is actually lost. So this could also impact the economy. And these, don't think that the impact would remain to whatever would remain in these particular aspects only. The impact would be felt much beyond these aspects. For example, if there are job losses, what might happen? If there are job losses, naturally people will be terminated from their jobs. Then what will happen? They won't have much to spend in the market. They would stop consuming non-basic goods. Ultimately, the demand for non-basic goods or luxury goods or goods which are not necessary for life, the demand for these kind of goods would decrease, and the companies which are producing these kind of goods, now they will also have to suffer. So if there is industrial sickness in one particular unit, let me give another example. For example, let's say there are 3 employees who are working with a particular unit, and the unit is staring at sickness, is not being able to earn profit. Then what will do? The unit will basically ask these people to leave. So their services would be terminated. Now these people come out of the firm, but they simply do not have much money in their hands, so they would stop consuming so many items which are not important for them. So rather than taking their family out for dinner, they would start having dinner at their home. Rather than using and wearing an expensive shirt or a pair of shoes, they would start wearing a much down-to-earth kind of a shirt which is much less expensive. Don't you think it would impact those retailers which are in the business of selling apparels? Don't you think it is going to impact those retailers, those textile firms which produce these kind of textiles? So what was sickness in a particular firm, it got translated into job losses, and then further the sickness has now infected the other firms also. So sickness in one particular unit can ultimately impact the other units also. Now this is one major reason why industrial sickness is such an important issue, and the government tries to take every possible step to rein in industrial sickness. Right. Now let us talk about some of these preventive measures. First is that you should be able to arrest the sickness at the incipient stage, right in the beginning. If you are able to arrest the sickness, and how would you be able to do that? You will have to look at the various things that we have already discussed as symptoms. I hope you remember what symptoms were. If the firm is delaying payment of statutory dues on a regular basis, then there is a problem. If there are so many people quitting a particular firm, it could be because of the impending losses that the company is staring at. If a particular firm is not able to operate throughout the day, the capacity is only being underutilized, then probably this is another symptom. So once you have a look at the symptom, once you have understood the symptoms, then you should be taking prompt actions to arrest sickness there and then. the more delay is there in these kind of corrective actions, the higher would be the chances of the firm ultimately turning sick. Then again, you should be monitoring for symptoms also. Banks many a times have given an example of how you can monitor for symptoms. Banks identify from the financial data like stock statements or inspection reports. They're able to identify how well a particular firm or a particular business is doing. So these symptoms, if monitored well, they can give you an idea about which particular firms are going to incur losses, are going to turn sick. Then if you remember, we talked about how many large scale enterprises which obtain their raw materials or which obtain their supplies from some small scale enterprises, they, owing to their dominant position in this transaction, they many a times do not pay promptly. So the supplier is not going to be paid promptly, which would mean that the supplier industry will have to go for a higher working capital loan, because they're not getting paid promptly and they need money to run their business. They will have to go for working capital loan, which will increase their interest expenditure and will increase their overall expenditure and reduce their overall earnings. And that is why this provision is there, that such principles, by principles what do we mean? By the principles we mean the customer industries. So if the customer industries are not paying promptly, they should be penalized. So if the money due to a small scale firm is not being paid promptly, then the customer firm should be penalized. Then again, the government can think of providing management consultancy to these sick enterprises or those enterprises which are about to turn sick. So these kind of management consultancies can be provided at a subsidized rate or as a free cost, and this will also help these industrial enterprises to make up for the lack of technical and managerial manpower. So some examples have been given. For example, how do you allocate surplus for depreciation? How do you enhance your efficiency, operational efficiency or business efficiency? So these kind of training programs could be done for the firm which is facing problems and which might start incurring losses in future. So these kind of management consultancy programs can be run for their staff, and they can also be provided free of cost management consultancy by the government and its agencies. Then again, the manpower needs to be trained so that their skills are not outdated. They know about the latest technology, most modern methods of production. So these things will have to be taken into account. The manpower needs to be trained on a regular basis so that they can, these people, the workers working in a particular firm, they can acquire skills. So this is one thing that they should be able to do. Then rehabilitation of those enterprises which have turned sick. Now this is one of the last resorts. Once you have found out that the sickness cannot be arrested at the incipient stage, or all these things have not worked out, then this is one of the last options that you resort to. Rehabilitation would mean debt restructuring. Now you have to tell me, what do we mean by debt restructuring? Debt restructuring, for example, I'll give you a crude example. Suppose I have to pay a debt of 2 lakh within 3 years and the rate of interest is, let's say, 10%. So in a way I have to pay somewhere around 2,60,000 in 3 years. So which means that I have to pay around 8,000 as monthly installments every year. If I get this debt restructured, and why am I doing this? Because my interest burden is too high. 8,000, suppose I cannot afford 8,000 to pay 8,000 every month. Then what will I do? I'll go for debt restructuring. What will happen in debt restructuring? I'll get this debt restructured from a shorter time period, shorter tenure, to a longer tenure. So now the same amount of money, I have the same amount of money which has been borrowed by me, around 2 lakh rupees, but now I don't have to pay it back in just 3 years. I have to pay it back in, let's say, 5 years. Now this becomes debt restructuring. My overall interest outgo would increase, but my monthly EMI would reduce, and this would reduce the interest burden on my firm. So this way debt restructuring works, and this reduces the cost of operations of the firm. Again, many a times providing extra working capital finance to the firm, to the sick firm may also work, and it may improve the situation of the sick firm. And then earlier the case was then when the enterprises are not able to do well and they turn sick, they used to be referred to the board for industrial and financial reconstruction. However, this board was dissolved in the year 2016. The job of this board was to revive and rehabilitate and liquidate the ones which are non-viable. So BIFR used to try and revive and rehabilitate the firms which are likely to be profitable in future, which can turn profitable again, which are potentially likely to turn profitable again. So such firms, the BFI used to try everything to revive such firms or to rehabilitate them. On the other hand, if BFI thought that this particular firm is not having any future prospects, then the task for BFR was to liquidate these kind of non-viable companies. Now, what has happened recently is that in India, the government has unveiled the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, which deals with issues like this. Those firms which have turned bankrupt, which have not been able to repay the loan amount, for them we have got now Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and within the code the task has been assigned to the National Company Law Tribunal. So if you go by the code, the task of deciding what to do with a sick enterprise has now gone to National Company Law Tribunal. You just need to keep this in mind, that this is the recent development. So BIFR does not exist anymore. So whenever you are mentioning BIFR in your answers, do mention that it does not exist anymore or it has been dissolved in 2016, right? So now we have discussed the industrial sickness, we have discussed the preventive measures also. In the earlier discussions we talked about the reasons, the causes behind industrial sickness, and then we talked about the symptoms of industrial sickness, and we also talked about industrial sickness in India. Sorry for this. So we have also talked about industrial sickness in India, and some of you have raised this doubt whether this definition changes or remains same throughout. So the definition of a sick enterprise keeps on changing from time to time. So this is one thing that you'll keep in your mind. Likewise, the sick industrial companies act that I talked about in the last session, it has now been repealed in 2016 after the unveiling of the IBC. Okay, so this has also now been repealed. So I was trying to just give you this idea so that you understand what basically are sick enterprises and what are the criteria on which a particular enterprise is said to be sick. There has got to be some criteria, so I just needed to tell you, let you know as to what are these kind of criteria, and that is why I had discussed it in this session here. So however, you need to keep in your mind that SICA, which was also amended in around 2000, does not exist anymore. It has now been repealed, and now we go by the IBC, and within the IBC system we have also got the National Company Law Tribunal. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. Please be ready for a test which will take place on Monday, the coming Monday. Please just don't cram the bullet points, because more than the bullet points, whatever I am discussing may be even more important. So you should not just try and cram the bullet points, but listen to the video very, very carefully. Write down your own notes. That should be a good idea. Thank you.